The sinking of the Titanic resulted in the loss of 1,500 lives, but did it help save even more? Could the ship's famous sinking really have made the water safer? Folks might forget that the Titanic wasn't a cruise ship, even though many of the ship's accommodations were on par with modern-day cruise ships. It held a swimming pool, squash courts, a gym, and more. Even so, there were fancier liners in operation at the time, but those had lower quality class areas in comparison to the Titanic, and yet it was categorized as an ocean liner because it carried cargo as well as people. It's reasonable to assume that if the Titanic hadn't sunk, it would have continued crossing back and forth across the Atlantic Ocean, carrying people and cargo until it got too old to be seaworthy and was decommissioned. Its novelty would have worn off, its amenities become as commonplace as others, newer ships would have been built, and even the size of the ship would end up unremarkable. On this point, Germany's SS Imperator was larger, heavier, and could hold more passengers than the Titanic, and it hit the waves in 1913, 1 year after the doomed British vessel. The SS Vaterland, which launched the next year in 1914, was even bigger. So on it went for decades. The most long-lasting of the Titanic's sister ships, the Olympic, struggled to keep up with newer, faster ships. She was retired in 1935 and dismantled by 1937. The early 20th century in which the Titanic launched was a tumultuous time in world history. World War I started in 1914, 2 years after the Titanic set out, and World War II started less than 30 years later in 1939.
Do you know how to shoot? A little.
World War I and its submarines marked a new era for naval warfare, one where German U-boats alone sank over 5,000 ships. That's a staggering amount, but one superseded by World War II, which saw over 15,000 ships sunk total before the war's end. Those 15,000 ships, it must be noted, contained over 500,000 people. If the Titanic survived its maiden voyage, who's to say it wouldn't have been sunk in a matter of years? As a large ship that traveled between two major countries, the UK and the US, it would have made an easy target. A mine or torpedo sunk the Titanic's other sister ship, the Britannic, in 1916. And even if the Titanic survived World War I and wasn't decommissioned like the Olympic before World War II began, how likely is it that the vessel would have survived another global conflict on an even greater, more destructive scale? If the Titanic hadn't been destroyed at sea during this time, it might have been commandeered and converted into a military ship anyway. This is exactly what happened to ships like the aforementioned SS Vaterland. When the Titanic sank beneath the ocean, it took the lives of over 1,500 people. It also gave rise to a new upgraded regime of safety regulations regarding ocean vessels, particularly when it came to lifeboats. The Titanic did have enough life jackets for everyone on board at over 3,500. But given oceanic weather conditions and the cold temperature of much of Earth's oceans, life jackets wouldn't have been enough anyway. At the time the Titanic launched in 1912, there were a couple of prevailing pieces of legislation that determined the quantity of lifeboats on board a ship: the Merchant Shipping Act of 1894 and the Merchant Shipping Act of 1906. In total, these two acts outlined lifeboat numbers based on ship weight, with 10,000 tons being the maximum. That would come out to 16 lifeboats for 990 people. The Titanic weighed over 46,000 tons, however, and no one thought to equip it with more lifeboats. Both the UK's Titanic Wreck Commissioner and the US Senate investigation came to a very common-sense conclusion. The quantity of lifeboats should be based on the number of passengers, not the weight of a ship. Lifeboat safety drills also became mandatory following the sinking of the Titanic, as did rules regarding onboard radios. While this seems like a no-brainer, we could argue that if the Titanic didn't sink, it might have taken another subsequent disaster to yield the same results. The sinking of the Titanic also led to safer ship designs. Just like changes to lifeboat rules and emergency drills, changes to ship designs may have happened anyway, but at a later time and perhaps after even more lives had been lost.
I'll never let go. I promise.
The Titanic wasn't necessarily poorly designed. It's more that steel ships like it had only been used for a short time, since the late 1800s, before it was built. As it stood, it could feasibly take on water and stay afloat, but only if it flooded in a specific way. The bottom deck of the Titanic was split into compartments separated by bulkheads that ran along the longitudinal axis connecting the front and back sides of the ship. If 3 consecutive connected compartments took on water, the ship was fine, unless certain combinations of boiler rooms, engine rooms, and dynamo got flooded too. However, even in the best-case scenario, the ship could only have stayed above water for 2 to 3 days. In the wake of the Titanic disaster, ships were designed with double hull layers, not just one. Also, the bulkheads were raised all the way to the ceilings of their decks rather than only partway up. This could completely contain water in a given compartment in the event of an emergency. Much like ship design and emergency protocols, the sinking of the Titanic had a huge impact on maritime laws related to oceanic safety. This is especially true because ocean waters are largely international, and maintaining proper safety necessitates the involvement of multiple nations and governments. If the Titanic hadn't sunk, such new regulations wouldn't have happened, at least not as soon as they did. Along these lines, the first International Convention for the Safety of Life at Sea met in London in 1913, the year after the Titanic disaster. 13 nations joined this meeting and signed its treaty, which resulted in several maritime law changes. Shipping companies, firstly, had to disclose the routes they intended to take. This meant that water patrols could more easily track the location of vessels if those vessels ran into trouble. Then, 1914 saw the creation of the International Ice Patrol, a division of the United States Coast Guard and now U.S. Homeland Security. The goal of the division, simply put, is to monitor and report the locations of icebergs to help increase ship safety. Even by then, though, U.S. Congress quickly passed the Radio Act of 1912, which allowed for 24-hour radio communication between operators and ships at sea, and created a separate frequency just for distress calls. The later Merchant Marine Act of 1920 allowed seamen to sue employers for injuries suffered while at sea.